Hello and welcome to episode 7 of For Zion's Sake, the Kufi UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alastair, and we're back. Last week we were away as it was a bank holiday here in the UK, and it was the Passover and Easter weekend celebrations, so that's what we were up to last week. And so today we're going to be discussing a lot of what happened over the Passover and Easter weekend holidays in Israel, and a lot of the events that happened there. So, Alastair, there's been a lot that's taken place, and there's a lot we need to discuss about.
Well, yes. I mean, it was a difficult weekend, and we saw a number of incidents, 2 major terror attacks in Israel on the Friday.
On Good Friday,
on Good Friday, and one of those was a car ramming in Tel Aviv, in which an Italian man was killed. 2 British nationals were injured, and another Italian national was injured. And that was followed also by a shooting attack, which took place in Judea and Samaria. And very sadly, 3 members of the same family were murdered. They were Rina and Mayadi, 2 sisters, and also their mother, Lucy, who was in the car also. She died from her wounds a few days later. And Rabbi D, who wasn't in the car, their father of the 2 daughters, husband, of course, of the wife, has spoken out a number of times. Now, that family is British-Israeli. So this has received quite widespread coverage here in the UK, perhaps for that reason. It was a horrific attack. This was a family, an innocent family, that had done no wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were... very sadly, their life has been, the life of that family has been torn apart through Palestinian terror.
Yeah, it's very sad.
And we're going to talk a little bit about this attack now, aren't we?
Yeah, well, we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about what led up to those attacks, the incitement, the incident that took place on the Temple Mount. But yeah, I mean, we just need to drive home the point here. You know, as you were saying, this was a British-Israeli family. One of the daughters was just 15 years old, a child. And well, regardless of the age, really, these were 3 innocent women who were murdered in cold blood simply because they were Jews who chose to live in the land that God gave the Jewish people.
Yes.
And the terror attack from both of these terror attacks was driven by a hatred of Israel and the Jewish people.
It was, yes.
And so should we go back to where it all began, like on the Temple Mount? Or
well, first of all, if we can maybe just look at the response that there was, because the statement which came out from the UK Foreign Office, I felt was shocking. And I know we spoke over that weekend, and we thought it was absolutely appalling that the statement effectively it condemned the attack. Let's be clear about that. But it also called on both sides to de-escalate.
Yeah. And this was the UK Foreign Office response.
Foreign Office.
Yeah, to 3 women being murdered.
Yes, both sides to de-escalate.
I know. Crazy.
I think that is a real insult to the state of Israel. It's an insult to the family.
Yeah.
And it is just completely wrong.
Yeah.
It also went on to also speak about the Temple Mount and the status quo. So here is a statement, and this was, I think, just typical of the sort of coverage that there was even in the media as well. Yeah. In making a moral equivalence between the Palestinian, Israel's actions, and we'll come on to that shortly, in terms of their security actions. Yeah. And counter-terrorism actions, making a moral equivalence to Palestinian terrorism. Yeah. And there is no such thing.
There is no equivalence.
And I think that last weekend, for me, really gnawed away at me, because I think that had to be challenged. And I'm really pleased Because there was a report yesterday on Sky News, in fact. They did an interview with Rabbi D, the father, and he revealed that James Cleverly, the British Foreign Secretary, has issued a better response, a better statement following the initial one. And he really did praise it. In fact, he compared it with the Balfour Declaration by calling it the Cleverly Declaration.
Right.
And this is what he said. He said, I feel that the statement saying that Britain stands unequivocally against violence and against terror is a landmark in British history in terms of the way it's dealt with the state of Israel. Up until now, and I completely agree with what Rabbi is saying, up until now, there's not been an unequivocal condemnation of violence. There's actually been a very sort of wishy-washy condemnation of violence, which I think is slightly the Foreign Office's fault, he said. He, this Cleverly, did the right thing. He did the true thing, and I can only thank him for the bottom of my heart. This may be the beginning of a new cycle of peace. We need to stop giving terror any possible window of goodness. We have to condemn it outright. It's outright evil. Terrorists are outright evil. They have to be told that and treated as such. And so that I thought was really good to highlight that the Foreign Secretary has issued something which is better than the initial response, and I'm really hoping that this might be, a milestone, and hopefully a change, because the Foreign Office for too long has repeated the same narrative time and time again. But actually, if it is truly going to stand with the state of Israel, it must condemn Palestinian terrorism without attempting to try and appease Israel's enemies.
Exactly. And this is the problem, because for too long, like you've said, it's the Foreign Office in the UK which has dictated the way in which, obviously because it's the Foreign Office, but it dictates the way in which Britain deals with foreign issues. But in terms of how we handle Israel, we like I've said this before on the podcast, that the Foreign Office is very much a Chamberlain instead of a Churchill when it's dealing with Israel and the Palestinians. And in a number of different issues, we're dealing with Iran and so forth. And so when we look at, for example, James Cleverly, he is a politician who is placed over the Foreign Office as the Foreign Minister, but the Foreign Office itself is made up of not lifelong necessarily, but long-term employees of the Foreign Office. Civil servants. They're not elected. They are, they gain their jobs through different means. And so they're sort of like part of the group, and they have like group think on a lot of these things. And
irrespective of the party and the Foreign Secretary, etc., they are a continuation.
Yes, exactly.
And that dependency, and that's sort of been, that has probably been the reason why there has been a consistency.
Yes, in the way
from
the
one
UK
government
handles
to
it.
the other.
Exactly. And so you have someone come in like James Cleverly, and who's
a good friend of it.
He is a good friend.
Of Israel.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, because the way the Foreign Office acts, it means that they sort of control the narrative of that politician, even though that politician may want to be stronger.
Yes.
They, like the Foreign Office, is advising that guy or that person, and they are then being manipulated in a way as to how to respond to certain topics.
It's probably only right that I do quote this statement, because I made reference to it. I'll just quote a portion of it from James Cleverly's letter to Rabbi D. He says, "There can be no justification for such senseless and abhorrent violence, and I unequivocally condemn the act of terrorism. The UK remains steadfast in our commitment to work with the Israeli authorities and all parties in the region to bring an end to the terrorism that Israel faces and to the cycle of violence which, as we have seen all too clearly, is so destructive."
Yeah.
And I must just add that even though the Foreign Office's statement was weak, Rishi Sunak's statement, by the way, after the attack was strong,
very strong,
in condemning.
Yeah.
So
And
there does seem to be a
it
disparity, doesn't there, between often individuals within government and the Foreign Office. But could this, because Rabbi D has also spoken, and there's a really, really powerful video in which he gives a speech to the world media, in which he challenges the media and say, it's time to start calling out evil for what it is.
Yes.
And could this be a turning point in the UK government changing its tact when it comes to Palestinian terror? What do you think?
Well, I would like it to be, but I'm not so convinced. I think, in all honesty, it's very easy to condemn terror.
Yes.
And if the initial statement wasn't condemning terror, that's a big problem in my mind. And I think...
Well, it did.
Well, yes, but it did
it always is called both sides to de-escalate.
Yeah. And yet, what was
it
Israel doing
them on the same...
Yeah.
There's no equivalence at all between an innocent family that is gunned down by a radical extremist and Israel, which is trying to stop terror and contain terrorism and root out supporters of Islamist terrorism. There's nothing. You can't.
There's no equivalence.
There's none.
Yes,
but so they have to stop pretending that there is.
I know, but the fact that they said that in the first place is the problem. And more than that, like if we go back a few days before...
Okay, let's go back a few days before.
Yeah, and I think we need to sort of paint a picture for the viewers because some people may not know exactly what took place, what happened and things. So on the week before Passover, on the eve of Passover, the terrorists of Hamas and other groups started to incite Palestinians to violence. Palestinian terrorists, Palestinian youth, Palestinian rioters. And what happened was they convinced certain people, and this happens almost every time Passover converges with Ramadan. They said that the people coming to celebrate Passover were going to do sacrifices on the Temple Mount, or they were going to rebuild the temple. They start to do all this sort of, put out propaganda and messages to incite people to go to the Temple Mount, go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and start to, lock themselves in, barricade themselves in, and stop the Jews from doing this. Well, the Jews aren't going to do that because that's not what's happening. And yet that's what Hamas is telling its people. And this is what happens all the time. They incite it all the time. They're trying to take our land, whatever they're trying to say. Anyway, on that evening, there was a group of around 350 Palestinians who barricaded themselves inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is, according to Islamic tradition, it's the third holiest site in Islam. And it's on the Temple Mount, which is the holiest site for Jews, and it's very important for Christians.
And of course, this happens kind of every year.
It happens regularly.
Also, this is the first time in 30 years that Passover, Ramadan, and Easter coincided
and all converged together.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I mean, if we want to talk a bit about Ramadan, with what happens at Ramadan is there is a belief within Muslims where they believe that during Ramadan, Allah blesses them double for things that they do. And so most Muslims who are peaceful, who think of it in a good way, they think of this as acts of kindness, acts of charity, good acts. So if they give to charity during Ramadan, Allah will bless them double back, right? That's the mentality that they have. When it comes to radical Islamic terrorists, what they believe is if they commit jihad, they will be blessed double. And so with that philosophy, I won't go into it too deeply, but there is a philosophy within, or a theology, I guess, within radical Islam that if they carry out jihad, if they are a martyr for Allah, or if they carry out an attack, they will be blessed double. They will receive their salvation, and also a certain number of their family members will also receive that salvation, but during Ramadan it will be doubled. So even more will enter into paradise. Obviously, we don't believe that here. And so that's what they believe. And so it's very easy during Ramadan, especially after Friday night prayers, where there's been religious message, a lot of incitement and things. It's very easy to stir up young men. Yes. Yeah. It's very easy to stir up young men to carry out these sorts of things. And there's like a big mob mentality. Anyway.
And in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because we probably saw, people would have seen on pictures on the news of fireworks shooting off.
Yeah.
This is inside a building that they claim is holy and consecrated.
Yes.
And yet they are they are locking themselves in, desecrating it with fireworks. So just to be absolutely clear, these fireworks were from the Hamas supporters themselves.
Yes. And so what happened was there was a group of around 350, I think it was. I think there was 350 people arrested by the Israeli forces in the end. But what happened was they went onto the Temple Mount. Yes. They started to chant things like death to Jews, death to Israel.
Yes.
They had Hamas flags. They had Lion's Den flags. They started to incite violence. They went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they barricaded the doors.
Yeah.
And it meant anyone inside the mosque, there were women, there were people praying, they were locked in. And there's testimony from those people saying, we had no choice. We were locked in and we couldn't get out because they said, you're not leaving here. They then barricaded the doors. There were negotiations between Israeli forces and the terrorists.
Right.
And the terrorists said, no, we're not leaving. And Israel has two things it needs to fix when this happens. First of all, worship at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which, according to all the international things, the status quo and so forth, worship at the mosque needs to be maintained, which means you cannot have people barricading the door and stopping that worship.
Yes.
So Israel had to resolve that issue. And second of all, the Western Wall is immediately below the Temple Mount. And there was attempts last year, for example, during Ramadan and during the Passover celebrations where terrorists went on top of one of the mosques and tried to throw rocks and fire fireworks down into where the Jews were praying.
Yes.
They accidentally ended up setting one of the trees alight on the Temple Mount.
Yeah, I remember.
And they caused these big scenes. And so below, you had these scenes last year,
Yes.
I think it was last year, where they had the Jews celebrating Passover, jumping around, dancing, and behind on the Temple Mount where there was fire, and that was used as incitement by Palestinian terror groups to say, look, they're celebrating the burning of Al-Aqsa. Well, Al-Aqsa wasn't burning; it was a tree that was on fire. It did look very graphic and vivid, and also it was set off by a terrorist, not by. And there was clear video footage of a firework misfiring into a tree and setting this thing alight. Anyway, this is basically what Israel needs to contend with. It needed to resolve the issue where Muslims were being stopped from praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And second of all, it needed to protect Jews who were praying at the Western Wall. Israel was trying to maintain order at the Temple Mount. So what happened? Israeli forces entered the mosque. As they enter, there's clear video footage where, this holy site, as you said, is being desecrated. There are rocks and stones. There's ripped carpets. There, even the Muslims themselves, the terrorists, they're walking in there with their shoes on, which is a desecration. They are firing fireworks. One of those fireworks set off a fire within the mosque.
Wow.
And Israel then had to go in and deal with that problem. And so Israeli forces went in. They arrested 350 people. The problem is when Israel was carrying out this raid, there's a small percentage of that raid happening where there is video footage of basically Israeli army being quite heavy-handed with these terrorists. And that video clip, which is probably around 10 seconds long, bearing in mind there's lots of other video clips showing fireworks and rocks being thrown and Palestinian terrorists chanting death to Jews. That single video clip of basically Hamas terrorists. Hamas is a outlawed terror group in most of the world, or at least in the Western world. These are terrorists being dealt with
terrorists.
quite
Yes.
heavy-handedly.
Yes.
That was used to basically incite massive
Yes.
propaganda and incitement against Israel.
And also terrorists, which we would normally attribute to the Gaza Strip, because that is which they have control over.
Yeah.
This is in the heart of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And Israel doesn't want terrorists on its borders anyway.
Yeah.
But not in the center of Israel's capital.
I know.
In
the holiest site of Judaism. Just imagine.
Well, yes. And I haven't seen that particular video you're referring to. But I have seen police forces around the world have to try and take control of some very violent situations.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not a job I could do. And of course, we have seen situations in the world where police forces sometimes take that to an extreme, which I don't think is acceptable. But trying to understand the context is, I think, really helpful, because Israel seems to get singled out like no other army and no other police force in the world.
Oh,
and yet, what were they trying to stop?
Yeah.
They were not trying to stop a peaceful protest, like we see sometimes in some parts of the world where innocent protesters get clamped down, brutally.
Or even shot, like in Iran.
Not like that.
Yeah.
We are seeing Palestinian terrorists, Hamas terrorists, perpetrating violence, and Israel's security forces trying to take it under control.
Yeah, exactly. And we have to be very clear here, because the media is not clear about this. Israel was protecting the Al-Aqsa Mosque from terrorism. That is what Israel was doing. And yet what was being spread around the world, especially within the Islamic world, was that it was Israeli forces storming Al-Aqsa and beating innocent worshippers.
Yes.
No, these were not innocent worshippers. I'm sure there were some innocent worshippers.
But there would have been probably innocent worshippers who wanted to gain access. And
there were some in there that were caught in the middle of it. But
Yes.
and we also need to bear in mind, Israel this wasn't a time where anyone got killed or even heavily injured or anything like that.
Yes.
Like, these people were basically subdued, arrested, and removed. That was what happened.
Yes.
And yet that was used, like, it spread like wildfire through anti-Israel groups, especially in the Islamic world.
Yes.
I guarantee the entire Islamic world condemned Israel.
I even think
weekend.
it started spreading before Israel entered, actually.
Well, yes, exactly, yeah.
Because there were reminders, from various governments of maintaining the status quo, even before.
Yeah.
So it was almost like
and
they were preparing for Israel to have to, expecting Israel to take some form of action, and it happened, and they were sort of ready.
Yeah, they were ready with their statements, sort of thing. But that's the thing, like, they say this thing about maintaining the status quo. Well, the status quo is actually discriminatory towards everyone apart from Muslims, because only Muslims are allowed to pray on the Temple Mount.
Yes.
Christians, if you go there as a Christian and pray, you will get removed. You will get arrested, maybe, or maybe worse if you get seen by the wrong people.
And am I right in saying that at a certain point during Passover, Jews were not permitted to enter after this incident? Is that...
Yeah, so right now, as we speak, it's not just during Passover, but during the last days of Ramadan.
Right.
When does Ramadan finish? It finishes on the 24th, I think. So in a few days' time. They're not allowed to go to the Temple Mount because of the incitement, because of the risk of violence.
Yes.
So basically, Jews going to the Temple Mount completely unarmed. Normally when Jews go to the Temple Mount, it's families, men, women, children, walking around, just looking at the site, having a nice tour, like a tour guide around kind of thing. Yeah. And whenever this happens, you see it on sort of the social media streams of like the Al-Quds network and some of the Palestinian media groups, and they're like, they've got it there, the Jews storm Al-Aqsa, and it's like just women and children walking around very peacefully, and yet they're constantly trying to incite this violence. So because that message is being put out there constantly, when they then have video footage of Israeli police, properly inside the mosque and, dealing with terrorists, they can, that's just fuel to the fire. They've already incited this. The propaganda's been going on for so many years especially within the Palestinian territories, but also around the Islamic world. As soon as it's like a spark lighting the fire kind of thing, and that's what happened that day.
So we mentioned about the 2 terror attacks which happened on that same day. You've mentioned about what took place on the Temple Mount, but can we now draw a connection, because there is a connection?
Yes. Yeah.
And this is why we're mentioning this, mentioning about what took place in the Temple Mount.
Yeah. The reason we're talking about the Temple Mount is because that is directly connected with what happened with the young family who were murdered.
Can you explain that?
Well, yeah. So basically what happened was, because of the incitement, and we're missing out another vital step, which is the rocket attacks. And so... Of course. So what happened was, it was the eve of Passover when this incident happened on the Temple Mount. The next, or that night, Hamas I think it was maybe Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists in Gaza fired rockets into Israel. These rockets hit civilian target, there was a civilian warehouse that was hit.
And of course we had the rocket attack from Lebanon. 34 rockets were fired from Palestinian terrorists.
Yeah, and it was likely Hamas terrorists who fired those rockets. Think about that, Hamas in Lebanon.
Yes.
And so it shows how there is now a connection between...
Because there was there's sort of like a default assumption that it was Hezbollah.
Yes, yeah.
And it might have been Hamas. So which geographically, just explain, is now the opposite to what... So you've got Gaza to the south of Israel and Lebanon to the north.
Yeah.
And Hamas would seem now to have a foothold on both borders.
Yeah, on both borders. And the thing is with Hamas, the reason why Hamas is more dangerous, I guess, on the north, it's a lot smaller in Lebanon than it is in Gaza.
Yeah.
We have to be clear. The main threat from Hamas is from Gaza. Yeah. But they are much more willing to fire rockets than Hezbollah is, because Hezbollah knows if it starts firing rockets against Israel, Israel will just, it will become a war zone. Israel will start taking out a lot of Hezbollah's infrastructure. And Hezbollah, even though they speak a big game, they are not ready for that conflict. Whereas Hamas, they're used to it. They've got nothing to lose. Their whole theology, not the whole theology, their whole doctrine, the whole way they operate is by sparking conflict with Israel.
Yes.
Because it actually, for some odd reason, it gains them notoriety within the Palestinian territories. Yeah, so, and then...
Yeah, I'll just say, just before we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
But there was actually an article over the weekend which said that Iran is reportedly rallying militant groups in allied countries to launch attacks against Israel, and coordinated recent Hamas rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip and from areas controlled by Lebanese terror group Hezbollah earlier this month. Apparently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal where an Iranian general says he held covert meetings with militant groups in the Middle East in recent weeks, including some operating in Syria and Iraq, to discuss attacks on Israel on multiple fronts, and with renewed determination supported by Iran. The IRGC, which Britain needs to ban, by the way,
all right,
including the Quds Force, is a US designated terrorist organization, and that is the movement which Iran, of course, is using to galvanize what it would seem to be a strategic attempt to bring various groups that have their differences and have their different geographic territories,
and have their different religious views as well.
Different religious, but the different views within their religion, but have one common goal and one common enemy, and that's the state of Israel. I just thought I'd mention that because I think that's worth observing, but I don't want to detract from the point that you were
I
making
think
in terms of
I think it's a very good point. And one thing, I've just looked it up quickly. It was interesting that on the 5th of April, which is around when just before when these attacks happened, the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, I'm probably not saying his name right, but anyway, that guy.
He'll forgive you.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, carry on.
He was in Lebanon on the 5th of April, meeting with senior people from Hezbollah, senior people from the Lebanese government, and suddenly Hamas fires the largest barrage of rockets from Lebanon since
and I believe
2006.
also Hamas and did you say Hamas? Just say Hamas?
Hamas,
and Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yes, that's right. And so, and as you said, one of the things we need to bear in mind is with all of these things, with any attack coming through from Israel, there's likely a connection with Iran. Iran has its hands on all of these different terror groups. Yeah. For example, with Hezbollah, Iran is fully behind. Like, Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. Yeah. The leader of Hezbollah said that literally everything they eat, everything they drink, every rocket they fire is because of Iran. And so that's Hezbollah is fully funded by Iran. Hamas is not fully funded, but it is quite heavily subsidized by Iran. And so Iran, and this is the connection between Hezbollah and Hamas. Yeah. Why are they working together? Well, because, the puppet master Iran is behind, pulling the strings behind the scenes and is helping them to work together, because Iran's goal is the eradication of the state of Israel, and it is working with whoever it can in order to achieve that. And it
seems to be escalating as well, doesn't it? In terms of that that attempt to influence these smaller terror groups. Yeah. And Iran is the one which I think Israel is, in terms of sort of the biggest threat. Yeah. It is Iran and their nuclear ambitions. Yeah, definitely. And that sort of thing. Yeah. But just going back, if we can, to drawing the link between what took place at the Temple Mount, and of course there's very sad terror attacks which took place, and the UK's response, because I mentioned about the response to the terrorist attack which took place, which started weak, has strengthened with James Cleverly's latest and personal letter to Rabbi D. Yeah. But the UK also made a statement regarding those regarding those riots on the Temple Mount. Yeah. At the time, it was issued as the terror attack. I don't know if it was just before or during, but around that time. Yeah. And you were mentioning to me earlier that you had some comments on that. Yeah. And I think that might be why you were reluctant to join me in my optimism that the UK could be changing tact, or at least learning from this. And we do hope that the UK will learn from this, of course. I'm sure we both share that hope. But do you just want to share the UK's response to those Temple Mounts? Because I think it's really significant what you mentioned to me. Yeah, it is very important. So with these attacks that took place, the incitement that happened from both the Palestinians around the world, it was actually amplified by Western governments. And one of the governments that did that was our own government, the UK. And so even though you're very positive, and also obviously Rabbi D, the father of the victims, the husband of the victims, he's very positive about James Cleverly. I am not. But he was, in terms of his response, he welcomed his statement. Yeah, exactly. Whereas I am not, because, and it's going back to the Foreign Office here, and I think this is where James Cleverly was badly advised by the Foreign Office as to what happened on the Temple Mount. So this is the 7th of April. This is Good Friday. This is just following the rocket attacks, the Temple Mount. This is the statement they put out, and they said, so first of all, there's 4 parts to this. First of all, they condemn the indiscriminate rocket attacks from southern Lebanon and Gaza and recognize Israel's right to self-defense. Good. Now is the time for all parties across the region to de-escalate tensions. Well, all parties... Wait. Sorry. Let's just stop there. Yep. Israel didn't fire rockets
No. Well,
into Gaza.
Israel
It responded.
Yes.
It responded. So
and yet Israel's lumped in there with the terror
Yes.
groups. You know, our ally Israel is lumped in with terror groups who are outlawed in the UK.
Yes.
And we're saying we're placing them together anyway. Then it says that the convergence of Passover, Ramadan, and Easter, the UK calls for all parties to respect the historic status quo arrangements at Jerusalem's holy sites and cease all provocative actions. So that's the first part. It then gets worse.
So do you think they were referring to the Palestinian terrorists?
Of course, no. I don't think they were.
Carry on.
No, I mean, they probably were, but anyone reading that is not going to think...
It's not clear.
It's not clear, yeah. They're conflating terrorism with Israel's actions again. But this is where it gets really bad. They said, the UK is a strong supporter of freedom of religion or belief and calls for places of worship to be respected. We value Jordan's important role as custodian of the holy sites in Jerusalem and condemns the Israeli police violence at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. When Israel's security forces conduct operations, they must ensure they are proportionate and in accordance with international law. Israel and the Palestinian Authority must take steps to honour the commitment agreed at Sharm el-Sheikh and Aqaba. And that, to me, is the worst thing they could have said. Because what they did, first of all, Israel did not break any international law there. I mean... we'll get into a heavy debate on international law if we were talking with someone else, but technically they weren't breaking international law. They were maintaining the status quo, which is what they're talking about, which again, the status quo is it's discriminatory towards Jews, Christians, and anyone else. But worst of all, they condemned Israel and only Israel, not Hamas terrorists who were inside Al-Aqsa Mosque, barricading the doors, locking people inside, wearing Hamas flags. Not Lion's Den supporters. They only blamed Israel. They condemned Israel. And this sort of rhetoric was then spread around the Arab world. The UK condemns Israel. Everyone's condemning Israel. You know, there's other people. Justin Trudeau, for example, he came out saying explicitly the same thing. I'll get Trudeau's statement. He said, "We are extremely concerned with inflamed rhetoric coming out." I mean, this is even worse, actually. "We're extremely concerned with inflamed rhetoric coming out of the Israeli government. We're concerned about judicial reforms. We're concerned about the violence around the Al-Aqsa Mosque."
Whoa.
So he just went full on anti. Yeah, that's Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. And this was happening around the world. Different presidents and prime ministers of Israel's allies were condemning Israel and attacking Israel. And this is, and for example, the UK statement that came out, this was on the morning when a Palestinian or two Palestinian terrorists waited at a junction as a civilian car, 3 women in a Nissan Micra, stopped at a junction. And as soon as they stopped, they opened fire. The 3 women, they tried to escape. The terrorists went, the car crashed on the side of the road just a few meters up there because the mother had already been injured. The terrorists then walked up to that point blank range, saw that they were 3 women and shot them dead, firing 20 bullets into the car. And if you see the scenes of the car, it's clear it's close range. It's clear that the terrorists saw that they were women. There's nothing to debate there. This was an atrocious murder. And as the UK was putting out this statement condemning Israel and only Israel, it was defending Hamas. By the way, Hamas is outlawed in the UK. Any attempt to justify what Hamas does, to protect Hamas, to condone what they're doing under UK law is illegal and is a crime. And yet our government the Foreign Office put out this statement condemning Israel and only Israel and protecting Hamas terrorists and their violence. That incitement was then used by the Palestinian terror groups to incite the murder of 3 women and also the murder of an Italian tourist who was run over in a what's his name? Alessandro Perini. And yet, I mean, and this is why I'm annoyed at the Foreign Office. This is why, and by the way, this was actually, I should point out, even though this was a Foreign Office advisor stuff, this is Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said, and he is the one who said the condemnation against Israel on the Temple Mount.
Appalling.
Yeah.
It is sickening.
It is sickening.
It really is.
Yeah.
And they keep speaking about the cycle of violence.
Yeah.
And eventually, the cycle has to be broken in terms of the UK's response.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, from my point of view, this statement would have added fuel to the fire. Justin Trudeau's statement would have added fuel to the fire. And I think our government needs to wake up. It needs to realise that when it's dealing with terrorism, when it's dealing with Hamas, when it's dealing with Palestinian terrorism, it has to treat them like it treats any other terror group.
Yes.
It wouldn't do this for ISIS. It wouldn't do this for Al-Qaeda. It only does it for the Palestinians.
Absolutely. Not only is it wrong, there's actually no merit at all.
No. It doesn't make them good.
The other side.
Yeah.
It doesn't change. It isn't working. It has not worked.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And the cycle of violence continues because of the appeasement of our government and other governments of the Palestinian terrorists.
Yeah.
And so I mean, we have to be clear. This was put out on the 7th of April. It was just before, maybe as the terror attack was happening with the D family. The Foreign Office then came out with a statement against the violence. You know, I mean, their first statement was weak against the violence against the D family, but now James Cleverly has corrected it. And I know Rabbi D has said positive things about James Cleverly, and I do personally hope he has learned a lesson from this. But I'm not convinced it's going to change the Foreign Office, because the Foreign Office has a long history of this kind of appeasement and this kind of conflating what Israel does and what the terrorists do. And as Rabbi D himself said, there is no moral equivalence.
No, I actually have his response here to his wife's murder, Lucy, and the children Maya and Rena. He said, "We will never accept terror as legitimate. We will never blame the murder on the victims. There is no such thing as moral equivalence between terrorist and victim." I mentioned about equivalence between terrorist and Israel's actions, but he actually draws a different message here. And that's the moral equivalence between terrorist and victim.
Yeah.
And he continues to say that, we need to choose, differentiate between good and evil. He says, and if we choose good, then we make the world a better place. I am saddened, he says, that recently, maybe over the past 20 years of my life, this innate ability to differentiate between good and evil has been gradually lost from humanity. He says, if you feel that it was wrong to shoot dead at close range 3 beautiful, innocent young ladies in the prime of their lives, he says, please post a picture of you or your spouse or your children with an Israeli flag. And, he continues to say that his beautiful late wife, Lucy, and I have tried to bring up our children with strong moral values, helping others, caring for others, building community. And he says that he prays, he believes that his surviving children will pass those values down to their children and play their part in building a better world. This anonymous terrorist with the Kalashnikov, what did he achieve? He says, a temporary victory, some marks he can carve into his gun. Where's his future? Is he spending the time with his children to teach them decent life values? Does he even have children? Or is he a child himself? He is a product of a broken culture that does not differentiate between good and evil, so he cannot see a future for himself. And I think these beautiful and very moving words, I think represent, obviously, values which he and his family hold.
Yeah.
And I think values of the Jewish people and the Jewish faith and of the state of Israel. And really this is a conflict of morals.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a conflict of morals, and we see this tension, this conflict between good and evil, right and wrong, light and darkness. But also, if it's the media or if it's UK government or whichever government it is, and as Christians who stand with Israel, we have to take a moral ground as well.
Yeah.
Because this is a moral issue. Yeah. Standing with Israel is a moral issue. Standing with the Jewish people is a moral issue. Standing against terrorism is a moral issue. And I think also typical of the morals which this rabbi and his family hold, I think is very moving when what I'm about to read shows that he doesn't have hate towards the terrorists. He actually says, I quote, "I don't hold any hate towards them. I feel that the Israeli security forces will do what they usually do, which is to track them down and bring them to justice, which I think is right because it prevents the next attack that they might do." And I think that's quite a profound and courageous thing. And so I just wanted to give that opportunity to share his words, because I think it puts some perspective in this conflict and this battle, which is affecting innocent people. It's a moral fight. It's a moral case.
And he brought that up in a lot of different, well, not a lot, a couple of press conferences. He was saying Israel is good, terrorism is evil. It is a clash between good and evil. And so there is this moral battle going on. And as you said, I've got a quote as well, probably from the same thing, where he said he has no hatred towards the terrorists. And obviously, like you said, he wants full justice. But he basically spoke about how this is another image that we maybe don't get from the international media, is actually he was giving some perspective of his experience following this attack. He lives in Judea Samaria, aka the West Bank, as the world calls it. Judea and Samaria, the heartland of Israel. He lives alongside Palestinians. He was saying that he holds no hatred towards them, and in fact, he said here, "I've had some Palestinian friends of mine from neighboring villages who have left messages in tears because I've known them for many years. They've known Lucy, they've known the girls," and he said, he spent a lot of time with them, had coffee with them. He has Palestinian friends, and so he says, we trust them. I trust them completely with my family. I still do, more so than other people I know. And but he said,
I think that's one where they said that they were first to greet, or they greeted them and wept with them. Yes,
exactly. And it's like, this is the thing. It's like we have this picture from the media that there's this big conflict, that there's Jews and Israelis and Palestinians. They don't have separate roads. They've got checkpoints, all this stuff. Well, actually, no.
They don't.
Yeah, it's like
well, they don't have.
The truth is actually they're a lot more integrated. They're a lot more friendly with each other. Obviously, there is a lot of problems. There's a big number of Palestinians who do support terrorist actions and things. And unfortunately, polls show that with attacks like this, there is still a large number of Palestinians who support these, attacks on innocent Israelis. But as in this case, he has friends who love him and his family and would have looked after them if they had known what was going on. And so we have to sort of have that love for our neighbour,
Well, absolutely. And Palestinian terrorism, the Arab people who want to live in peace are victim of the actions of Hamas, in the sense. And if we want to truly love all people, we want to love Jews and Arabs, and have a heart for the Palestinian people that are in the midst of this, the answer is still to stand with the state of Israel, not to condemn Israel. So I thought that was a real beautiful testament, and a courageous one, and not one which considering the circumstances, anyone, I'm sure, would find easy to make. But that is a statement which he makes, and one which should be given recognition. Did you want to close with a scripture? Or anything else to add on that?
Yeah, well, no, I don't think I have anything else. Well, I'll add now, I guess, with scriptures. I actually got two scriptures.
Could I just say one more thing as you find the scriptures? And that is, we've mentioned a lot about the geopolitics. We've mentioned a lot about individuals and families that have been affected. We've also considered some of the things which could still continue. And we must pray. We must pray for the D family. We must pray for the family of that Italian tourist in that separate attack. And we must pray for the Jewish people and for the nation of Israel and for all those who are affected by terror. But we must also pray for our UK government that they will have moral clarity when it comes to the state of Israel. It is time to draw a line in the sand. It is a time to let go of historic attitudes towards Israel from this pattern of appeasement which has not succeeded and will never succeed. It is time to well and truly stand with Israel. And that is what I believe we should pray also, that we will pray that this will be a turning point. So I just thought I'd mention that. But
I think that's good. Well, there's two scriptures. I mean, we were discussing earlier, and I couldn't think of a scripture. Well, while we've been talking, I've sort of pulled up some things. But you mentioned about Isaiah 5:20 verse 21. So I think this scripture is, well, I'll read it. Isaiah 5 verses 20 to 21. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. And so that, I think, is a warning to the enemies of Israel. It's a warning to our government. It's a warning to the activists who hate Israel and call Israel evil.
It's a warning to all of us.
It's a warning to all of us, yes. Including many Christians who need to hear that message about Israel. And so I think that's the first one. And I want to say, that is our prayer, that our nation will turn back to God in many, many aspects.
Yes.
And obviously here at CUFI, what we're fighting for is that the UK government will stand with Israel unequivocally.
Yes.
That there will be none of this whataboutery, none of this, moral equivalence, none of that. They will stand with Israel. They will stand against evil and stand with good. And the warning, as we know, as the Bible says, is woe unto them. We don't want, and obviously there's many other things associated with Israel. I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. We do not want Britain to be cursed. We want Britain to be blessed, and one of those blessings is by blessing Israel. But the second goes back to Rabbi D, the second scripture I've got, and that's from Matthew. This is New Testament. This is one of the core things we have within our Christian belief about love. And that's Matthew 5 verse 43 to 48. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So love your enemies. And I think that's a challenge to us, because even though I get impassioned about some of these things, we have to love the Palestinian people. Just as Rabbi D was saying, he still loves and trusts his neighbors. He forgives those who have killed his family. That is such, this is only a few days ago that happened. That's such a powerful thing to say. And I think, we need to show love, but love is not appeasement. You do not appease with love.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing where I think the world gets it wrong. It doesn't have a full grasp of God's love. And that's what we should be tapping into. And so love is not appeasing. Love is standing up to evil. But at the same time, it's not hating people or, your enemies. You have to love and you have to.
And Rabbi D he said that he hoped that justice will be undertaken and that they will serve the penalty. But the forgiveness is what he discovered in terms of their actions. And yes, we are to love, we are to condemn evil, and we are to be strong against evil. But I think that's well put, Alex. We want to have, God is a God of love. It's a God of justice. It's a God of mercy. It's a God of judgment. But that is God's love is so great and wonderful, and so may we have that. I love. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Alex. If you love Israel, and I'm sure you do, then please continue to stand with us here at Kufi, because we are trying to tackle these issues at the heart of the cause, and we want to see Britain make a stand with Israel and be a good friend to Israel. And so to help us achieve that, we ask you, if you are not already a supporter, to please consider donating. There are many ways to donate, and one way is to visit our website at www.cufi.org.uk/donate, and any gift that you feel led to give helps support the work of Kufi and make a stronger impact in this nation for Zion's sake. So thank you very much for your support. Any closing remark, Alex? Shall we say?
Well,
Shalom.
Yep, shalom.
Thank you for watching.
And keep standing up for Israel, because you guys are as important as we are. Like, we have to all raise our voices and do our best. So share the word, get active on social media and keep praying. That's the main thing.
Amen.
Yep.
So until next time, God bless you.
Yep, God bless.